So, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Emma, and I believe that if I'm seeing here you all today, it's probably because you read the talk title and a couple of words like data privacy and AI caught your eyes. But there is another key concept here, it's federated learning. However, before we get too deep into math, statistics, and probabilities, I'm going to give you a little bit of more background of why I am the one standing here in front of all of you today to talk about all of it. So, I'm currently working as a software developer, but my journey in this area began when I was at my last year of university, where I collaborated with a research group, and my task there was focused on a natural language processing task within the medical field. So that's where I became fascinated with the cutting edge area of federated learning. And to show you that what I'm going to tell is not just about theory, I'm going to walk you through some real novel research that I conducted with this group. Unfortunately, we didn't publish any paper, but hopefully we'll get some time to properly work on it really soon. So with all of this in mind, I would like to begin by contemplating a scenario that might not be that far in the future. So now, I want you to imagine a world where healthcare is truly revolutionized by artificial intelligence. So picture an AI that is able to go through thousands of medical records within minutes, identifying crucial patterns that humans might miss. An AI that is able to help diagnosing rare diseases earlier, pinpointing the most effective treatments for each individual patient, or even accelerate drug discovery. This might not be science fiction anymore, as the promise of AI looks really promising in healthcare. But there is a need here, a really big one. This incredible, not that far future relies on something absolutely fundamental. And maybe some of you are already imagining what it is. It's data. And not any type of data, but highly sensitive and private patient information. So here we're talking about medical records, discharge summaries, doctor's notes, the very raw material of healthcare. So this is where we encounter the dilemma. We all know that in order to train deep learning models, the more data we use, the better. It's like ourselves. The more experiences we have, the more we learn. Yet, when it comes to medical data, we hit the block, a really, really big wall built from the privacy regulations like the HIPAA or the very need of protecting the patient's confidentiality. So every hospital, every clinic, every research institution holds a treasure trove of invaluable information in form of medical text, and it's just locked away, scattered, and siloed. And we cannot simply gather it all together into one giant central database. So think about it. How do we build an intelligent model that is able to understand complex diseases when all of this crucial information it's all scattered across dozens of thousands of medical institutions, and it's legally and ethically impossible to bring it all together? It's like trying to bake a cake when all of the ingredients are in different houses and we are not allowed to move them. And this is not just an inconvenience. It's one of the major roadblocks when it comes to healthcare innovation. This means that our models are often trained on smaller and less diverse data sets than they could really be. So these models might miss crucial patterns, be less robust, or even exhibit biases as they are not exposed to the full spectrum of data that we really have out there. So how do we train a model to detect body parts within a doctor's note when all of this data is so restricted? And this fundamental challenge, let me call it the data dilemma, it's what drove my research. I could see, and I hope that you can all see, the immense potential of AI to transform healthcare, but also this unconquerable barrier. So I wondered, could we find a way to use all of this distributed medical knowledge to build powerful natural language processing models without ever breaking a single patient's privacy? And this question led me to explore an approach that I believe that holds the key to this very dilemma. So, what if, instead of struggling to bring all of the data to where the model is, we could somehow bring that data, that model to the data, sorry. And this idea is exactly what federated learning proposes. But before we get into that, the idea challenges the conventional belief of how AI models are often trained. So we've always done it the same way. We would gather all of the data into a central database, and we would perform centralized training. So now I want to get back for 1 second to the incredible AI that I spoke of earlier, the one that was able to go through thousands of medical records within minutes. And in order to train it to do something really valuable, like identifying some medical key terms within that text, we would need to give it access to the data. And this, it's key when it comes to natural language processing tasks in healthcare. So, as researchers, if we decide to go through the traditional path, you can more or less imagine which are the steps we would need to follow. So first, we would go to hospital A, B, Z, even clinic C, and we would ask them to give us all of the data they have. Every single patient know all of their clinical records, the treatments done, the medication prescribed, everything. And we would gather it into one giant central database. Next, a team of data scientists or NLP experts would meticulously clean, standardize, and label all of this information. So imagine the effort of making sure that CAD consistently means coronary artery disease through dozens of thousands of terabytes of information instead of computer-aided design. It's quite difficult. And next, once our data is ready, we could feed it to our deep learning model, and we could let it go through all of those dozens of thousands of terabytes of information to learn from the most subtle patterns, the abbreviation, medical jargon, how symptoms are described, how to differentiate a symptom or a disease from a treatment, and so on. And finally, after some weeks or even months of training, we would get our sophisticated NLP model that it's able to detect those medical keywords with pretty impressive accuracy. And this traditional approach has been a gold standard, and for good reason. So first, it provides the simplicity of control. All of the data, it's in just one place. It's like having all of those medical records perfectly structured and organized in a library. And we have full control over the training process. And then, this is also supposed to be the most optimal learning approach. So by giving the models full access, they learn better from the pattern. So the more examples of diabetes or pneumonia they see in different contexts, the better they get. However, this proven path, this obvious solution, quickly hits a wall when it comes to real-world medical data. So we simply cannot gather all of the data from hospital A, B, or clinic C into one giant central database. Why? Well, first, we have a privacy problem. There are legal requirements like the HIPAA in the US, GDPR in Europe, and many other similar laws all across the world that are not just suggestions, they are legal requirements. And they are there to protect identifiable, raw patient information from being freely moved, aggregated, or used. And this is not just about good practices, this is about legal requirements that are there to protect the patient's confidentiality. Then we have a trust issue. So even if these laws were looser, imagine the governance and logistical nightmare. Getting dozens of thousands of individual institutions to freely hand over all of their data to a third party or an external server, it's a non-starter. Who would own the data? Who would be liable in case of the data breach? Here, the trust barrier is immense. And finally, we also have data problems. So even if we overcome miraculously the privacy and trust issues, well, every single doctor writes their notes their own way. Every hospital, every institution has their own standards. So trying to centralize and standardize all of this information, it's an error-prone approach. And the consequence, we're leaving an ocean of invaluable information out there untouched, and our NLP models, despite of all of their advances, are often trained on smaller and public datasets that are just simplified, anonymized, and often synthetic. And this means that our models are not being trained with the real-world, messy, complex, and yet diverse data that we really have out there. So We found ourselves with very powerful NLP tools, but we hit a block when it comes to the data they desperately need. So it's like having a team of really brilliant surgeons with no more equipment than an unsharpened knife to operate. And until now, I haven't revealed any secret. These are all very well-known problems, which leaves us with a critical question. So, if we cannot bring the data to where the model is due to logistical and ethical reasons, what then? Is there any other way to empower our AI to learn from all of this distributed medical knowledge? Well, there might be. And this is where federated learning emerges as our game-changing solution. So I want to go back for the last time to our ideal world with our incredible AI. And what if, instead of struggling to bring that private data to where the model is, we could somehow bring that model to the data? What if the models could travel, locally learn, and then just share what they have learned instead of the raw information? And as I've said, this idea is exactly what federated learning proposes. So, the term itself emerged in 2016 when a team at Google faced a similar privacy issue. So, they wanted to improve some of their features of the mobile devices, like the speech recognition or the predictive text. And in order to do this, obviously, they needed to access the user's data. So, as you can imagine, they could not just simply pull all of this data and move it to a server in the cloud. So their solution was groundbreaking, federated learning. What they proposed, instead of sending that data to a server in Google, was to send a machine learning model to each one of those mobile devices. So these models would be learning locally from how the user interacted with their own device, the words they use, their speech patterns, everything. And once the local model the learning had finished, none of this information would ever leave the local personal device. Instead, an encrypted update, would be sent to an external server. So this server would just gather all of the updates sent by the millions of devices and use them to train a central model. And this was a revelation, not only for mobile devices, but for any domain where keeping the user or the patient's privacy is key. So if we get back to our hospitals and our goal of detecting medical keywords within that text, if we decide to follow the federated approach, the process looks quite different and way more respectful to the user's privacy or the patient's privacy. So now, each hospital will keep the data right where it is. So under their own strict security protocols and firewalls, and this data will never leave the local secure database. Instead, a generic NLP model will be sent to each one of those domains, and think about it like a trainee surgeon that is willing to learn. So for example, if we go to Hospital A, the NLP model will be trained using exclusively the data that we have in Hospital A. So our trainee surgeon will be learning from helping the patients that go to Hospital A. They will learn how to identify diabetes or pneumonia within the context of that hospital. And once the local learning has finished, none of this information will ever leave the local secure domain of that hospital. Instead, the updates, the lessons learned, what made this NLP model smarter will be shared with an external server. And this is just in form of some numerical numbers that are encrypted. So our trainee surgeon will just get back with all of the new surgery techniques they have learned from having helped the patients that went to Hospital A. And the same will happen in Hospital B or Clinic C. So next, all of these updates will be gathered by a central server. And well, the central server acts like a coordinator. It will aggregate and average all of these updates and use them to train a more robust central model. So our trainee surgeons will just get back to their central learning school, and they will be sharing with each other all of the new surgery techniques they have learned in the past days, benefiting from the learnings of the peers. Once this is done, this global NLP model will be just sent back to all of the hospitals. The hospitals will simply download it and update the local model, benefiting from the knowledge of the entire federation without ever seeing each other's data. And this approach brings us two main benefits. First, we have the privacy protection. And this is the most obvious and important benefit. This means that the patient data will never leave the local secure environment. And this is privacy by design. We are able to train deep learning models without breaking the patient's privacy and using distributed data, which means that we are now able to use data that was unreachable until now. And then we also have distributed computational load. So in order to train deep learning models, any type of deep learning models, usually a high computational load is required. So by following the federated approach, the training is distributed across all of the participants of the federation, meaning that we don't have a central server overwhelmed, leading potentially to more efficient and scalable solutions. So this theory looks compelling, right? We are able to train deep learning models to detect medical keywords using distributed data without breaking the privacy. And we have overcome one of those major roadblocks I was speaking of earlier when it comes to healthcare innovation. But the question remains, can this truly work as well as the centralized training? Let's put this theory into test. So the stage is set. We have our clear problem, the unreachable distributed medical knowledge, and a promising solution, federated learning. So it's time to put the federated learning head-to-head to the traditional centralized one. And here, the goal is quite simple. We want to prove that a federated learning model trained under the privacy constraints can reach the same performance level as a centralized one when it comes to detecting medical keywords in medical text. So let's dive deeper into this experiment. As I've said, the idea is really simple. We want to prove the effectiveness of those federated models when it comes to understanding complex medical text and then identifying and labeling medical keywords like diseases or symptoms within medical text. And this is a core natural language processing task known as Named Entity Recognition and Classification, or NERC, that consists simply of teaching deep learning models to detect keywords in a sea of text. So in this slide, you can see just a simple medical sentence where some of those key terms have already been labeled. So we find that we have two symptoms and a disease. And in order to know whether a word belongs to a term or not, we've used the VO notation. And this VO notation stands for beginning, inside, and outside. And it will tell us in a really simple way whether these words belong to the key term or not. So just to keep this example simple and clear, I didn't put the O label, which means outside, but you can imagine the patient presented, all of those words are labeled with the O letter. Then, when it comes to our terms, the three terms consist of a single word, which means that they are the beginning and the end of their own term. So how do we know this? If we take as an example calf, the next word is and. It's an outside word, which means that our term had ended in the previous word. Instead of calf, if we would have calf, fever, and headache, we would also know that the term ended there because the next word, fever, has been already been labeled with the letter B, which means that it's the beginning of a new term. And finally, if instead of fever, we will have high fever or very high fever, now the term is different. It consists of several words. So how would it be labeled? High is the beginning of the term, right? So it's labeled with the B letter. And then fever is the next word, which means that it's inside of that term. So it would label with the letter I, meaning that it's inside of the term that was defined earlier. And in order to do all of this, I needed realistic data. And as you can imagine, getting my hands on real-world medical data, it's not a simple thing, not even for research. So what I did was to turn into some highly respected medical datasets known as I2B2. And these datasets have been created all over the different years for medical challenges in the context of training deep learning models. But they are very, very used in research because they are based on actual patient data from intensive care units where all of the information that can be used to identify those patients has been either removed, masked, or hidden, right? So using this data allowed me to mimic a real-world scenario. And in this slide here, you can see just a small example of one of those data sets where the terms have already been labeled. And this is really important because in order to train the models, it's not only the data that we need, but we need to also provide them with the answer of the task that they need to perform so that they can learn from the example. So here you have H2 blockers, and above of it, there is some interesting information like it has been identified as a treatment, and also the position it begins and it ends. And all of this information is used by the deep learning models to learn. So in the following slides, I'm gonna talk about the actual experiment, and you'll see some screenshots of actual code that I used to perform these experiments. So I use them to give a little bit more sense of reality to what I'm going to tell. It's not all of the code is here, but just to give you an idea of what it is. Everything was written in Python, and I used a framework known as Jupyter Notebooks, which was quite interesting because I needed to make my code understandable and reproducible by someone else once I left the research group. So Jupyter Notebooks allowed me to not only execute all of the code all at once in a server, like a script, but you can also execute the code in sections, put actual headers, text, not only comments in the code. It is possible to visualize some graphs and metrics, so it's really nice. And then a really interesting thing is that you can simply upload those notebooks in Google Drive and execute them for free in servers in Google. So for these small experiments, it's super useful. But well, coming back to the actual steps of the experiments, the first thing that I needed to do was to prepare my data. And this is one of the most important and yet sadly time-consuming tasks of training deep learning models. So what I did was to just take all of the data that I had available and I cleaned it. I put it in a format that the models could use and understand to learn. Next, I had to choose the model. So there are a lot of models out there, but I decided to use a publicly available and pre-trained model known as BERT, which stands for Bidirectional Encoders Representation from Transformers, a really long name. And specifically, I used the VO Clinical BERT, which is a pre-trained model on generic medical data. So since the model is already pre-trained for us, the only thing that I had to do was to do a second round of training by adding a head layer to this model to train it to do the specific task that I wanted to, identifying those key terms in text. So BERT models are a specific type of model that are able to understand the words within a context. So unlike other models that read the text sequentially, BERT models, well, that is from left to right, okay? BERT models read the sentences all at once, making it bidirectional. So what they do in order to understand the words within a context is that in the moment they read the word, they read at the same time the words that go before it and after it. And the training process of this model consists of two parts. I've already mentioned them. First, we have the pre-training, and then we have the fine-tuning. For the pre-training, the model is trained on a generic vast amount of data, and it has to perform two different tasks. First, there is the MLM, or Masked Language Model. And in this case, the model is given just a sentence with some words masked or hidden, and it has to try to guess which was the original word from getting the context from the words that surround it. And then there is the next sentence prediction. In this case, the model is given two sentences, and it has to try to guess whether the second sentence logically follows the first one. And this gives the model the ability to make relationships between sentences. So, since we have the pre-training done for us, we perform the fine-tuning. And this is a really simple task where we teach a generic model to perform a specific task. So we will just do another round of training using more specific and less data, really focused on the task that we wanted to perform. Okay, so we have data prepared and the model selected. Now it comes to the moment of training. And here it's where our two approaches diverge. So the first thing that I did was to perform a baseline experiment. So I took all of the data that I had available and I trained a centralized model. And this gave me a baseline, the absolute best performance that we could ever hope for in an ideal world where keeping the privacy is not an issue. And then, using this baseline, I did a series of federated learning simulations. So, for these simulations, the first thing that I needed was to get my hospitals. And in order to do this, it was quite simple. I just divided all of my datasets in equal sizes, and those would be my clients, my members of the federation. And then I had to choose an algorithm. There are a couple of them out there, but I just went for the federated averaging one. This is a quite well-known model, and it's really used because it performs really well in this kind of tasks. So this is how conceptually looks like. The first thing that we will do is to send a generic BERT model to each one of those clients or members of the federation. And the first round of training will begin. So at the beginning of the round, we will select randomly a subset of the members of the federation, and we will perform local training using the data that is available in those clients. And this is quite an intensive task. So this means that we will perform several epochs, where an epoch is a full pass all over the data that we have locally available. And this will give the model the ability to absorb the data that is there. And once the local training is done, as I have been repeating for the last 25 minutes, none of this information will ever leave the local domain. Instead, an update will be shared with an external server. And these updates are just numerical weights that are highly aggregated and encrypted. So our central server will get all of the updates sent by the different selected clients, and it will aggregate and average those updates. And this is why this algorithm is called federated averaging, because it gives the same importance, the same weight to all of the updates sent by the members of the federation. And in my case, this was perfect, because as I have said, I decided to divide the datasets in equal sizes, so I wanted to give the same importance to all of the updates. It is also true that in reality, we cannot expect that all of our members of the federation are equal. Some of them are bigger institutions than others. Some perform research, some other are more focused on a specific medical domain. So we might want to give more importance to the updates sent by specific members. But just to keep the simulation simple, I decided to use the average. So our central server will aggregate and average those updates and use them to update the central model. As part of this process, we not only update the central model, but we will also evaluate its performance. Once the global model is updated, it will be sent back to all of the members of the federation, not only the ones selected for that round of training, and the models will just download it and update the local model. So this full round of training, it's called a communication. And what we will do is to iterate in this algorithm, performing several communications, improving little by little the global model. And well, beyond all of this core process, I also had to fine-tune some hyperparameters. And the hyperparameters are just some small settings that are given to the model to learn to control them, how the training process happens. So here you have just 3 examples of them. First, I played with the number of hospitals or the number of clients of the federation that I had available. And the reason was quite simple. I just wanted to compare the performance level of a model that was trained using more clients with less data in them, and a model trained with less clients and more data in them. Then I also played with the hospitals per round. So the members of the federation that are selected for each round of training. And this is quite important. We cannot expect that all of our members of the federation will always be available for a round of training. In reality, it can happen that a hospital is just offline when it comes to their moment of training. So we need to be prepared for that case. And finally, on a more technical side, I also played with the sentence length and batch size. These are just some settings that are given to the model to be trained. So after all of this preparation, and the training process, the moment of truth comes. The results are in. So I performed a lot of experiments, to be honest. I used different data sets, different hyperparameters, even different models. And in order to measure the performance level of all of those models that I was getting, I used some standard metrics like DF measure and accuracy, which tell us in a really simple way how well the model did when it came to identifying those terms. So what I found was truly exciting and honestly a huge relief. The results clearly showed that a federated learning model could reach virtually the same performance level as a centralized trained one. Given big data sets, I'm going to explain it a little bit later, but with smaller data sets, the federated learning models perform way better. But in this chart, you can see just a small example of a couple of those experiments. So for those two data sets under same context, and with this, I mean same hyperparameters, same type of model, the federated learning model reached a performance level slightly above the centralized one. Being honest, with some other data sets under the same context, federated learning model reached a performance level slightly below the centralized one. But in overall, taking a look at all of the results that I was getting from my experiments, I could tell that the performance level was virtually the same one. And this is not just a win for a research paper. This has some profound implications when it comes to healthcare innovation and AI. This means that we have actual evidence that we can train deep learning models using distributed data without breaking the privacy. And this opens entirely new paths for collaboration and innovation in healthcare AI. But what does this mean for us, not as researchers, but as developers? So we've seen today that federated learning can empower the AI to learn from distributed data without breaking the privacy. And this has some profound implications. So first, we've been able to unlock data that was unreachable until now. Federated learning opens the path to train more intelligent and robust medical models, and this means that the models can be trained using real-world medical diverse data. And at some point in the future, this might lead to these models to give more accurate, more accurate diagnosis, more personalized treatments, and even at some point, better patient care. Then there is the power of luck. And this was something that I discovered during the experimentation, and it was really interesting. So when data is short, which can be usually the case of rare or specific medical conditions, federated learning models were more effective than the centralized trained ones. So it seems that with the distributed learning, the models generalize better, avoiding memorization pitfalls that usually happen with the centralized approach when data is short. And then there is also the smart collaboration. So, of course, the more data we have, the better, always. But I also learned about the efficiency sweet spot. So we don't always need endless rounds of communication and learning. There is a moment where the model's learning levels off. And understanding this balance means that we can train complex models without the excessive computational cost or time. But as I have said, these are huge implications, but what do they really mean for us as researchers and as innovators? Well, federated learning frameworks are maturing rapidly. The tools are there and the proof is here. So it seems that we are no longer limited by the impossible task of having to gather all of the information into a central place. And as developers, we have now the tools to build privacy-preserving AI solutions, and we are also now empowered to explore all of these federated learning frameworks to think about how we can apply them to our own data challenges and the impact those models will have. So the future of AI, not only in medicine, but in any domain where keeping the privacy is key, it's not about a centralized control. It's about the smart, privacy-preserving collaboration. And of course, we have the technology and now the evidence. So thank you. I'll be more than happy to answer any question you might have.